Hi, this is International Master Squarology, and in this Chess.com lesson, I'm going to be talking about Emmanuel Neumann's third signal, alignment. Neumann defines alignment as a situation where several pieces are on the same line, horizontal, vertical, or diagonal. This position comes from the rapid game played between Dmitry Andreikin and Peter Svidler at the 2013 Tromsø Chess World Cup. Here, White played a profound tactical move, a move that I really like. Are you ready to see it? And boom goes the dynamite. I know what you're thinking. How is that a tactical move? And how is it profound? Okay, there's hardly anything going on, so White takes a timeout and rules out any back rank checkmates for good. It may seem kind of weird for him to do that since there are no back rank checkmates in sight, but it's like when you go outside and you see a cumulonimbus cloud in the distance, or maybe you feel like it's lurking there, so you go back inside and you grab your umbrella, and then your wife asks you, "Darling, why are you getting your umbrella? It's sunny outside." And then you tell her, "Honey, I'll be back in 4 hours," with dry socks and a dazzling finish based on the tactical signal of alignment. And then she says, "Darling, what are you talking about?" Moving along, Black protects the a6 square with queen b7, but White plays a simple 1-2 punch. He attacks d6, makes the queen go to d7, and then nestles the queen in on a6. Now things start to get wild. But before I get into that, I want to tell you what Nigel Short, Grandmaster Nigel Short, suggested during the live broadcast. Nigel, who is a former contender to the Classical World Championship, suggested Black play knight e7 and fight for the c-file. For example, if White plays a4, Black can play rook c1, followed by rook c8, and he's fighting for the c-file. Nigel considered this minimally better for White, and indeed it looks equal. It looks like it's going to be a draw. Svidler instead played the somewhat bizarre f5. Why? Well, first let me explain why it's bizarre, because you might not think it's bizarre, even though it's bizarre. Okay, so the c-file is the most important thing in the position because it's an open file. And another thing is that White has the advantage because White's more active. The pawn structure is symmetrical, so really you can just see whose pieces are active, and that has to be White's pieces. So usually when you're defending, you don't want to push your pawns unnecessarily. You don't want to push your pawns unless you have a really good reason for doing that. So it's strange that he would play that. One, because he's kind of ignoring the c-file, and two, because he's unnecessarily pushing his pawns. So why does Black play f5? Svidler has two ideas in mind. One, he wants to safeguard the knight on d5 by ruling out an e4 pawn push. And two, he wants to centralize the king by playing king f7. Svidler's playing big risk, big reward moves. f5 weakens the a2 g8 diagonal and weakens the king, and king f7 also weakens the king, but both of those moves come with potentially huge rewards. Because if we end up in an endgame, Black will have a centralized knight and a centralized king. Of course, that's a big if. Alright, so check this move out. Knight f4. It's a deceptively strong move. It's strong, but it appears weak. It looks unambitious because at first glance it just allows Black to take on f4 and double White's pawns. So it doesn't look like he's going for much. But actually, it's a totally fine move. Houdini rates it as the best move. White's idea is to just open up the e-file for his rook. In the game, Svidler went for material with knight b4, forking the queen and the a2 pawn. Knight fork distance is another signal that we'll cover in another lesson, but right now we're going to catch a glimpse of it. If White continues defending a2 with queen a3, then Black wins the exchange with knight c2. So Andreikin plays the queen back to e2 and sacrifices the pawn on a2. Now, whether it was a sacrifice or a blunder, I don't know. Really, only Andreikin knows that, During the broadcast, Nigel Short was saying that he was saying that he just blundered the pawn. And I don't know. I have no idea. Sacrifice or not, fireworks are about to go off. So white plays e4 to open up lines because black's king position is weak and white's pieces are well placed. Black brings his knight closer to the center because it was offsides on a2. It was really far from the action. So he brings it closer to the center. And now white goes into 2 + 2 = 5 mode. 2 + 2 = 5. It's kind of like turning into a Super Saiyan if you're a Dragon Ball Z character. White's going to start putting his pieces on really good squares. It's like magic almost. Okay. So he begins by playing queen f3, aligning his queen with black's king. He clears the file for his rook, and he makes a threat. So what is white threatening? Pause the video and figure out what white is threatening. Ready? Okay, if you didn't find it, it's because you didn't watch my last lesson. Because I repeated it a lot of times. Exposed king plus unprotected piece equals spork. Alright. So the threat is queen b3, hitting the king on f7 and the unprotected knight on b4. See that? That's why black played a5. Alright. So here, white plays consistently. He plays rook e6. He utilizes the freshly vacated e-file to penetrate into black's territory and attack a few pawns. That rook is hitting a few pawns. It's hitting d6, and it's hitting h6, and it's also hitting f5 in a way, because it's interfering with the alignment that the black queen on d7 has with the pawn on f5. For example, ideas like queen h5, check, and then taking the pawn on f5 could be a possibility. Could be. I mean, I'm not saying that's what's going to happen, but they're in the air. Black retreats his king to g8, and white once more aligns his queen with black's king. He plays queen g3, and he aligns the queen to the king and pins the pawn on g7. So now this comes with a threat. White's now threatening to play rook h6, and that's a really difficult threat to meet. Because if he plays something like, for example, let's go through what he could play. If he plays king f7 or king h7, then the least we could do is play queen g6, check, and then pick up the pawn on d6. If he plays king f8, then we can play rook d6, we can snap that pawn off. And if queen d6, then look, our queen on g3 is aligned with the queen on d6. So we can play something like knight g6 check and pick up the queen. We're winning material after that. This is another case of alignment. And if he plays king h8, then it looks like we can just play rook e7 and fork the queen on d7, and we're also threatening queen g7 checkmate. And then if he takes the rook on e7, then we have a fork. Knight g6 forks the king and the queen. That's knight fork distance. Which is not what we're covering, but it's good for you to understand that if your opponent's position, or if your position has two signals, then that's like one or two signals, then that can open up a Pandora's box to the rest of the signals. In the game, black played the desperate knight d5, with the idea that if white takes, then black wins the exchange. But he played it out of desperation. There was nothing else he could have played. I mean, he saw that all the king moves were bad. He saw that they all lost material. So he just played that move out of desperation. Alright, so here it's white to play, and he has a crushing move. Pause the video and try to find it. Ready? Queen b3. Neyman defines alignment as a situation where several pieces are on the same line. Horizontal, vertical, or diagonal. Here we have a diagonal alignment, and it's brutal. Absolutely brutal. The d5 square is weak, which means no pawn can protect that square, thus making it critical. The knight on d5 was already being attacked, and it's unprotected, so you can imagine how forcing queen b3 is. Let's see what happens if black takes the knight on f4. Rook e7, check. And when the king moves, white can simply take the queen with his rook. And he's up a lot of material. Of course, none of this would have happened had white not taken king position into account on move 18. You remember that? h3 on move 18? And you thought it was a bad move. It was actually genius. If the white pawn were still on h2, what would happen? Rook c1, check, which would lead to checkmate. You see that, don't you? Honey, I'm home. Oh, darling, did you get wet? Not at all, honey. Oh, darling, how did you know to take your umbrella? Well, honey, I saw a lesson on alignment on Chess.com's YouTube channel. Although it let me know that alignment is where several pieces are on the same horizontal, vertical, or diagonal line, it also let me know that the signal of alignment rarely occurs spontaneously, but rather as a result of having to defend a position that already has a few signals, like weak king position and unprotected pieces. Honey, I should also mention that knowing about these signals can help you prevent them from appearing in your position. And after the lesson, I followed the author on Twitter at Squarology. Oh, darling, I love you.